The morning sun rose over New Pyongyang like any other day. Captain Dae-sung stood on the command deck of the colony's defense center, drinking his third cup of coffee. He was a tall man with tired eyes and gray hair at his temples. 20 years in the military had taught him to expect trouble, but he never expected it to arrive in golden ships. The Kalrathi fleet appeared in orbit at 0600 hours. 12 massive vessels, each one gleaming like polished metal in the sunlight. They were beautiful in a strange way, all curves and flowing designs. Nothing like the blocky human ships that orbited nearby. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission," Lieutenant Hannah said from her station. She was young, only 25, but her voice never shook. Dae-sung liked that about her. "Put it through," he ordered. The main screen flickered to life. An alien face appeared. It had 4 eyes arranged in a square pattern, smooth blue skin, and a mouth that didn't quite move right when it spoke. The translation came through clearly. "Greetings, humans of New Pyongyang. I am Ambassador Velthan of the Kalrathi Empire. We come with an offer of integration into our great society. As is our custom, we shall demonstrate our military superiority through a formal battle. This is standard procedure. Do not be alarmed." Dae-sung felt his jaw tighten. "A battle? You're attacking us?" "Attacking is such a crude word," Velthan said, and somehow the translator caught his condescending tone perfectly. "This is a demonstration. A ritual. We have studied your species. You are adequate warriors. This will last perhaps 6 hours. When you reach 30% casualties, you will surrender. We will accept. Then we discuss terms of your integration. Very civilized. And if we refuse?" Hannah asked. "Refuse?" Velthan seemed confused by the question. "That is not how this works. We are offering you a place in the Empire. This is an honor." The transmission cut off before anyone could respond. Dae-sung looked around the command center. 30 officers stared back at him. Some looked scared. Some looked angry. Private Jinwoo, standing guard by the door, just looked confused. He was barely 20 years old, fresh from training. "Sound the alarm," Dae-sung said quietly. "Get everyone to battle stations. This is not a drill." The Kalrathi attacked at dawn. Their ships fired bright blue beams that cut through the air like lightning. The colony's shields flared and held, but barely. Dae-sung watched the defense grid light up with warnings. "They're landing troops at sectors 7, 12, and 18, Hannah reported. Infantry supported by walkers. Estimated 3,000 ground forces. How many do we have?" Dae-sung asked, though he already knew. 800 combat-ready personnel, sir." The math was bad. Everyone knew it. But Dae-sung had been in bad situations before. "Deploy all units. Standard defensive positions. Make them work for every meter." The first hour was chaos. The Kalrathi soldiers were good, Dae-sung had to admit. They moved in perfect formation, their weapons precise and deadly. They were taller than humans, faster, stronger. Their armor absorbed bullets that should have killed them, but they fought strangely, carefully, like they were afraid to take real risks. Private Jinwoo was stationed at Outpost 7 with his squad. 12 soldiers holding a communications tower against a Kalrathi advance. He crouched behind a concrete barrier, his rifle hot in his hands, and tried not to think about how scared he was. "Contact front?" Sergeant Il-sung shouted. The Kalrathi came in a line, their shields shimmering. Jinwoo fired. His bullets sparked off their armor. One Kalrathi fell. Then another. But there were so many, a blue beam cut through the air. Sergeant Il-sung went down, not even screaming. "Just gone, fall back," someone yelled. But there was nowhere to fall back to. The Kalrathi were everywhere. Jinwoo saw Private Sungmin take a hit to the chest. Corporal Jaeho's head simply disappeared in a flash of blue light. The world became fire and noise and terror. Then Jinwoo was alone. His squad was dead. All of them. He crouched behind his barrier, breathing hard, checking his ammunition. 2 magazines left. Maybe 60 rounds. The smart thing would be to run. To hide. To surrender. Jinwoo thought about his sister back on Earth, about his mother who cried when he enlisted, about Sergeant Il-sung who had taught him to shoot. He stood up and started firing. The Kalrathi seemed surprised. One of them broadcast something in their language, probably asking him to surrender. Jinwoo didn't speak Kalrathi. He just kept shooting. When his rifle clicked empty, he drew his pistol. When the pistol ran dry, he pulled out his combat knife. A Kalrathi soldier stopped advancing, clearly confused about why this small human wasn't running. Jin-woo charged. He didn't kill the Kalrathi. They were too strong, too well armored. But he tried. He stabbed and slashed and fought until they knocked him down. Even then, on the ground with a broken arm, he kept trying to fight. The Kalrathi squad leader stood over him, weapon pointed at his head. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the alien lowered his weapon and spoke into his communicator. The words translated came through Jinwoo's earpiece. "Commander, we have a situation. The human won't stop fighting. He's alone. He's wounded. He's out of ammunition. But he won't stop. What are your instructions?" Back in the command center, Daesung watched the casualty reports climb. 20% losses. 25%. The Kalrathi were good at this. They pushed hard but not too hard. They were managing the battle like a business transaction. At 30% casualties, right on schedule. Ambassador Velthan's face appeared on the screen again. "You have fought adequately, Captain Daesung. Your losses are at the acceptable threshold. Broadcast your surrender, and we will cease hostilities. You will be integrated into the Empire with honor. This is how civilized species conduct warfare." The command center went quiet. Everyone looked at Daesung. Hana's face was blank, but her hands were clenched into fists. The junior officers looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. Daesung thought about Private Jinwoo, still fighting alone at Outpost 7 according to the drones. He thought about all the soldiers dying out there. He thought about the Kalrathi's arrogant face on the screen. He smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Surrender?" Daesung said slowly. "Ambassador, I think there's been a cultural misunderstanding. You see, we don't really do that. 30% casualties? That just means we have 70% left to fight with." Velthan's 4 eyes blinked in confusion. "I do not understand. This is the threshold. This is how warfare is conducted." "Maybe for you," Daesung said. His smile got wider. "But we're human. We're just getting warmed up." He cut the transmission and turned to Hana. "Launch the counterattack. All reserves. I want every soldier we have on the field. Show these bastards what humans look like when we stop being polite." Hana smiled for the first time that day. "Yes, sir." The Kalrathi expected the humans to stop fighting, to accept defeat with dignity, to follow the rules. They were about to learn that humans didn't have a rule book. They didn't have an off switch. They just had fury and coffee and a deep cultural hatred of being told what to do. The real battle was just beginning. 6 hours into the battle, Commander Krishan of the Kalrathi fleet stood in his command chamber and felt something he had never experienced in 40 years of military service: confusion. The humans should have stopped fighting by now. Every species in the known galaxy followed the 6-hour rule. It was biological law. After 6 hours of combat, soldiers became exhausted. Mistakes happened. Unnecessary deaths occurred. Civilized species recognized this and paused to negotiate, but the humans weren't pausing. If anything, they were fighting harder. "Status report," Krishan demanded. His tactical officer, a young female named Silresh, looked at her screens with all 4 eyes. "Commander, the humans have not reduced their combat intensity. Our forces report that human soldiers who should be incapacitated are still fighting. We have multiple confirmed reports of humans fighting with severe injuries that should render them unconscious." "That's impossible," Krishan said. "No species can maintain combat effectiveness after 6 hours. "Show me." The screen lit up with battlefield footage. Krishan watched a human soldier with a shattered leg drag herself to a mounted gun. She strapped herself into the seat and began firing. When Kalrathi soldiers tried to flank her position, she didn't retreat. She just kept firing until they had to pull back. "Who is that?" Cretan asked. "According to identification scans, that's Sergeant Baora." She lost her legs an hour or two of the battle. She's been in that gun emplacement for 4 hours. She hasn't stopped firing. "Commander, she should be in medical care. She should be screaming in pain. But she's just died." Cretan felt something cold in his chest. "What are the human casualties now?" 47%, Commander. "And their combat effectiveness?" Suresh hesitated. "It hasn't decreased, sir. If anything, they're fighting with more aggression than before." That was impossible. That violated every known principle of warfare. When soldiers saw their companions fall, when they grew exhausted, when losses mounted, they became cautious. They preserved themselves. That was logical. That was survival instinct. But the humans weren't being logical. Corporal Taeyang was a medic. He had been a medic for 3 years, and he was good at his job. His job was to save lives, not take them. But after 6 hours of watching his friends die, after running through enemy fire 17 times to drag wounded soldiers to safety, after taking 3 bullets himself, something changed in Taeyang's mind. He was treating a wounded soldier behind a collapsed wall when a Kalrathi squad surrounded his position. There were 6 of them, all with weapons pointed at him. One of them spoke through a translator. "Medic human, you are wounded. Your position is overrun. Surrender and you will receive medical treatment." Taeyang looked at the wounded soldier he was treating. Private Young Su, 19 years old, bullet in his stomach. He looked at the Kalrathi. He looked at the grenade on his belt. "You know what?" Taeyang said quietly. "I'm really tired." He pulled the pin. The Kalrathi had excellent reflexes. They scattered fast enough that the grenade only killed 2 of them. But Taeyang wasn't trying to kill them all. He was trying to make them afraid. It worked. The surviving Kalrathi soldiers ran. They ran from a wounded medic who had decided he would rather die than surrender. They reported back to their commander that the humans were insane, that they didn't value their own lives, that they couldn't be captured because they would rather explode than surrender. Lieutenant Hannah hadn't slept in 30 hours. Her eyes burned. Her hands shook from too much caffeine and adrenaline. She had watched 300 soldiers die under her command, and she would remember every single face for the rest of her life, but she couldn't stop. Every time she thought about closing her eyes, another alert came through. Another position under attack. Another squad calling for support. "Lieutenant, Sector 9 is requesting artillery support," a junior officer said. Hannah pulled up the tactical map. Sector 9. Friendly forces were danger close to enemy positions. The shot would be difficult. In training, she would have taken 5 minutes to calculate it perfectly. But this wasn't training, and she didn't have 5 minutes. She ran the numbers in her head, factored in wind and distance and the curve of the planet, and gave the order. Fire mission approved. Coordinates loaded. Fire. The artillery roared. 3 seconds later, reports came back. Direct hit. Enemy forces destroyed. Friendly safe. "Good shot, Lieutenant," Captain Daesung said from across the command center. Hannah nodded and immediately moved to the next crisis. There was always a next crisis. She would sleep when the battle was over. Maybe the Kalrathi tried to withdraw at the 6-hour mark. It was their legal right under the conventions of warfare. Both sides paused after 6 hours to rest and negotiate. That was the law. That was how civilized species behaved. They broadcast their intention to withdraw. They expected the humans to do the same. Instead, the humans attacked. A full assault. Every remaining soldier, every tank, every aircraft. The humans hit the withdrawing Kalrathi forces like a hammer. "Commander." Cretan watched in horror as his carefully organized retreat turned into chaos. Kalrathi soldiers, exhausted from 6 hours of combat, suddenly faced humans who seemed to have endless energy. It wasn't that the humans weren't tired. Footage clearly showed them stumbling, bleeding, barely able to stand. But they kept coming anyway. Why aren't they stopping? Cretan whispered. Nobody had an answer. Private Jinwoo regained consciousness in a crater. His left arm was broken. Something was wrong with his right eye, everything looked red and blurry. He couldn't remember the last time he ate or drank water. His mouth tasted like blood and dirt that he should have been in a hospital. He should have been evacuated hours ago. Any sane soldier would have stayed in that crater and waited for medical help. Jinwoo checked his pistol. Still had half a magazine. He climbed out of the crater. A Calrathi patrol spotted him. 5 soldiers, fresh from a ship, coming to reinforce the front line. They saw a single human, wounded and alone, walking toward them. They assumed he was surrendering. They lowered their weapons slightly. Jin-Woo started shooting. He hit one before they realized what was happening. The others scattered for cover and returned fire. A beam grazed Jinwoo's shoulder, burning through his armor. He felt the pain distantly, like it was happening to someone else. He ran out of ammunition. He drew his knife. The Calrathi soldier closest to him raised his weapon, ready to end this insane human's life. Then reinforcements arrived. Human reinforcements. A full squad, all of them looking as battered and exhausted as Jinwoo. But they fought like they were fresh from training. They fought like they didn't know how to stop. The Calrathi patrol fell back. Then they ran. Jinwoo collapsed. A medic reached him, started checking his wounds. "You're insane," the medic said. "You should be dead?" Jinwoo laughed. "It hurt. Everything hurt." "Yeah, but I'm not. Get me patched up." "I'm going back out there. You can barely stand." "I can stand enough." The medic looked at him for a long moment, then smiled. "Crazy bastard. Fine, let me tape you together." By hour 8, the Calrathi had suffered 12% casualties. For them, that was catastrophic. Their entire military doctrine was built around minimizing losses. 12% meant something had gone terribly wrong. The humans had suffered 53% casualties. And they were still attacking. Commander Krishan sent an emergency transmission to the Calrathi homeworld. "We need guidance. The humans are not following standard warfare protocols. They do not stop when injured. They do not respect withdrawal protocols. They do not surrender when tactically appropriate. We are not fighting a military force. We are fighting something else entirely." The response came back 3 hours later. "Continue the battle. Break their will. All species break eventually." But Captain Dae-sung stood in his command center, running on coffee and rage, and smiled at the reports. The Calrathi were pulling back. They were confused. They were scared. Good, let them be scared. "Lieutenant Hannah," he said, "prepare the next wave. We attack at dawn." "Sir, we don't have a next wave." "We're running on skeleton crews?" "Then the skeletons will have to do." Hannah smiled. Her eyes were red with exhaustion, but her smile was genuine. "Yes, sir." Somewhere in the colony hospital, Sergeant Biora was arguing with doctors who wanted to sedate her. "I can still fire a gun," she insisted. "I don't need legs to fire a gun." Somewhere in the field? Corporal Taeyang was still alive somehow, still treating wounded, still refusing to evacuate, somewhere in the ruins. Private Jinwoo was taped together with bandages in spite. Walking back to the front line, the Calrathi had fought for 6 hours and wanted to rest. The humans had fought for 8 hours and were planning their next attack. The Calrathi were learning a terrible truth. When you fight humans, the battle isn't over when you want it to be over. It's over when the humans say it's over, and the humans hadn't said anything about stopping. Dr. Yuna had been a xenobiologist for 15 years. She had studied 47 different alien species. She understood their biology, their evolution, their psychology. But standing in the medical bay on day 3 of the battle, looking at a captured Calrathi soldier, she realized she understood nothing at all. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered. The Calrathi prisoner, a young male named Relkin, looked at her with his 4 eyes. He wasn't hostile. He seemed confused more than anything else. "What doesn't make sense?" he asked through the translator. "You," Yuna said, gesturing at her medical scanner. "Your biology. You're incredibly efficient. Your muscles use 40% less energy than human muscles for the same output. Your cardiovascular system is optimized for sustained performance. Your neural pathways process pain differently, reducing shock response. You're built better than us. Yes, Relkin said slowly. My species is quite advanced. Why does this confuse you? Because you stopped fighting after 6 hours. Your body was barely stressed. You could have kept going. Relkin's eyes widened in horror. Keep fighting after the limit? That would be barbaric. The 6-hour limit exists to prevent unnecessary damage. After 6 hours, the body begins to accumulate stress. Efficiency drops. Mistakes happen. Death becomes random rather than strategic. No civilized species fights past the limit. Yuna looked at him for a long moment. We've been fighting for 3 days. That's impossible. Your soldiers would be dead. A lot of them are dead. But the rest are still fighting. Relkin shook his head. Then they are insane. There is no tactical reason to continue past exhaustion. It violates every principle of survival. Yuna turned to her assistant, a young man named Dong Hyan. Pull up the scans we took of our own soldiers, the ones who have been in continuous combat. The screens lit up with medical data. Yuna pointed at the readings. Look at this. Stress hormones off the charts. Muscle damage. Microfractures in bones. Sleep deprivation, dehydration. By every medical standard, these soldiers should be incapacitated. Then why aren't they? Dong Hyan asked. Yuna pulled up another screen. Brain scans. This right here. The human adrenal system. When we're under extreme stress, our bodies flood with adrenaline and cortisol. It overrides pain. It gives us strength we shouldn't have. It keeps us moving when we should fall down. That sounds inefficient, Relkin said. Your body is damaging itself. Yes, Yuna agreed. It is, but it keeps us alive in the short term. Humans evolved as hunters. We didn't have claws or fangs or speed. What we had was endurance. We could chase prey for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. We're not built to be strong. We're built to keep going. She pulled up historical data. Our species has records of soldiers fighting for weeks without rest. We have documentation of people surviving injuries that should kill them through sheer willpower. We have cultures that glorify fighting until death rather than surrendering. Relkin looked at the data with growing horror. This is a species-wide mental illness. Maybe, Yuna said. Or maybe it's just how we survived. In orbit, High Scholar Thelanori had been brought in by the Kalrathi Empire to study the situation. He was their foremost expert on warfare, military psychology, and tactical doctrine. He had written 12 books on the subject. He had advised the Empire for 60 years. He watched the battle footage and felt his entire understanding of warfare crumble. Commander Krishan, he said slowly. Show me the footage again. The one with the soldier with the missing arm. The screen played the footage. Private Jinwoo, now officially missing his left arm from below the elbow, was still fighting. He had tied a tourniquet on the stump. He was firing his rifle one-handed, bracing it against his hip. He wasn't accurate. He wasn't efficient. But he was still fighting. How long has he been in combat? Thelanori asked. 72 hours, Scholar. He's been injured 16 times? He's been given medical treatment 8 times, and he's returned to combat immediately after each treatment. Why? Thelanori whispered. Why doesn't he stop? We don't know. Thelanori watched as Jinwoo's position got overrun. The young human fought hand-to-hand with Kalrathi soldiers twice his size. He lost. They beat him down. But even on the ground, half-conscious, he was still trying to fight. They don't stop, Thelanori said. That's the answer. They simply don't stop? But that's not an answer, Krishan protested. There must be a reason. A tactical advantage? A strategy? No, Thelanori said. That's what I'm trying to tell you. There is no strategy. This is their nature. They are persistence hunters. They evolved by chasing prey until it died from exhaustion. They have cultural stories about humans who fought impossible battles. They have words for refusing to give up in dozens of variations. This isn't a tactic. This is what they are. He pulled up more data. Look at this. The Calrathi species evolved from ambush predators. We became efficient. We learned to calculate risk versus reward. We developed civilization because we learned when to stop fighting and start negotiating. This made us successful. And the humans? The humans evolved from something that never stopped chasing. They became successful despite being weak and slow because they simply never gave up. Their entire psychology is built around persistence. When we reach our limit and stop, they reach their limit and push through it. Krishan looked at his tactical displays. 3 days of battle. His forces had suffered 28% casualties. The humans had suffered 71% casualties. And the remaining 29% of humans were still attacking. How do we defeat them? He asked quietly. Thelanori was silent for a long time. I don't think we can. Not like this. We can kill them, certainly. We have superior numbers and technology. But we cannot break their will. Because they don't have a breaking point. Not one that makes sense to us. Chief Engineer Hyansu stood in the colony's reactor control room and laughed at the damage reports. Everything was broken. The shields were at 12%. Half the power grid was down. The reactor itself was held together by prayers and very creative engineering. How long can we keep this running? His assistant asked, honestly? It should have exploded 2 days ago. That's not reassuring, Chief. Hyansu shrugged. I stopped worrying about reassuring people around hour 20. Now I'm just trying to keep us alive long enough to kill them. An alert blared. A Calrathi warship was charging its main weapon, targeting the reactor facility directly. One shot would destroy the entire complex and take out half the colony with it. Hyansu looked at the controls. At the reactor that was barely holding together. At the power readings that showed him exactly how unstable everything was. He smiled. You know what? If they want to blow us up, let's blow up together. Chief, what are you doing? Something very stupid, Hyansu said. He started typing commands. Override codes. Safety disengages. Power redirects. Evacuate the reactor level. Everyone out now. What about you? Someone needs to keep the reactor stable for the next 3 minutes. That's me. Now go. His staff ran. Hyansu watched his screens and ran the numbers. The Calrathi ship was charging its weapon. 90 seconds until it fired. The reactor was building to critical mass. He had to time this perfectly. He thought about his daughter, studying engineering back on Earth. He hoped she would be proud of this. It was his masterpiece, really. His final exam, the Calrathi ship fired. A massive beam of energy lanced down from orbit, aimed at the reactor facility. Hesu hit the final command. The reactor went critical in a controlled explosion, all that energy directed upward in a tight column, the beam from the Calrathi ship met the column of reactor energy in the atmosphere. The collision created a flash of light visible from orbit. When it faded, both the reactor and the Calrathi ship were gone. Chief Engineer Hyansu died smiling aboard the Calrathi flagship. Alarms screamed. A Dreadnought-class warship, one of their most advanced vessels, had just been destroyed by a human who had turned his own reactor into a weapon? That was suicide, someone said. No, High Scholar Thelanori said quietly. That was a human showing us what they value. They value winning more than they value their own lives. How do you fight that? How do you negotiate with that? Commander Krishan sent an emergency message to the Empire's Supreme Council. The message was short. We are not fighting a military. We are fighting a species that doesn't understand losing. Request immediate reinforcements or authorization to withdraw. The humans will not stop. I repeat, the humans do not stop. In the command center, Captain Dae-sung received a report of Hyansu's death. He closed his eyes for a moment. Just one moment. Then he opened them and looked at the tactical display. Hyansu just took out one of their capital ships, he said to the room. Let's make sure he didn't do it for nothing. Lieutenant Hannah, what's our status? Shields down to 9%. Ammunition at 40%. Personnel at 29% combat effective. Good, we have shields, bullets, and soldiers. That's all we need. Sir, the Kalrathi are requesting a ceasefire. Daesung laughed. It was not a happy sound. Tell them they had their chance to stop at 6 hours? Now we fight until we win or until we're all dead. Ask them which one they prefer? The message was sent. The Kalrathi response came back quickly. You are insane. Daesung smiled. Probably. But we're still here, and you're running. The Kalrathi Empire made their fatal mistake on day 14. They decided to escalate. Supreme Nexus. Kormouth sat in the Grand Council chamber and listened to Commander Krishan's reports with growing anger. 14 days. 14 days of continuous battle against a single colony world, and they still hadn't won. This is unacceptable, Kormouth declared. We are the Kalrathi Empire. We have dominated this sector for 3,000 years. We will not be humiliated by primitives. Supreme Nexus, High Scholar Thelanori said carefully. I must advise against further escalation. The humans respond to overwhelming force with increased aggression, not submission. This is contrary to all military psychology, but the data is clear. Then we will use such overwhelming force that aggression becomes irrelevant, Kormouth said. He turned to his military advisor. Send the war fleet. 500 ships. I want that colony reduced to rubble within a day. Thelanori felt cold. Supreme Nexus, that is genocide. That is victory. The order was given. 500 Kalrathi warships entered orbit around New Pyongyang. It was a fleet capable of destroying entire civilizations. Against one damaged colony with 12 defense frigates and orbital platforms barely holding together, it should have been effortless. Captain Daesung watched the fleet arrive and felt something break inside him. Not his spirit. Something else. The part that cared about living through this. Lieutenant Hanna, he said quietly. How many ships do we have operational? 6 frigates, sir. The rest are too damaged. The orbital platforms are at minimal functionality. And they brought 500, yes, sir? The command center was silent. Everyone knew the math. This wasn't a battle. This was an execution. Daesung stood up. He was so tired. He hadn't slept more than a few hours in 2 weeks. His hands shook from too much coffee and too little food. But his voice was steady. All right, he said. We can't win. Everyone here knows that. But we can make them remember us. We can make sure every Kalrathi who survives this battle wakes up screaming about humans for the rest of their lives. He looked around the room. At the exhausted officers who had fought for 14 days straight. At Lieutenant Hanna, who had stayed at her post the entire time. At the soldiers who should have broken but hadn't. I'm going to give an order, Daesung said. And it's a criminal order by any sane military standard. I'm ordering all ships to ram enemy vessels. I'm ordering all orbital platforms to overload their reactors. I'm ordering every soldier left alive to take as many of them with us as possible. He paused. Anyone who wants to object, do it now. I won't hold it against you. Nobody spoke. Hanna stood up. Sir, I need you to authorize my codes. What codes? The ones that let me override the safety limiters on the orbital cannons. If I'm going to die, I want to take out at least 50 of those ships first. Daesung smiled. Authorized. Anybody else want to do something insane? Every hand in the room went up. The battle that followed would be studied by military historians for generations. It had no official name. The humans called it the Last Stand. The Kalrathi called it the Horror. The 6 human frigates, held together by patches and prayers, launched straight at the Kalrathi fleet. The Kalrathi assumed they were retreating. They assumed wrong. The frigate, Indomitable, captained by Commander G1, rammed directly into a Kalrathi battlecruiser at full speed. Both ships exploded. As she died, G1's last transmission was simply, worth it. The frigate, Defiant, did the same. Then relentless, then unyielding. The Kalrathi fleet scattered in confusion. Ships didn't ram other ships. That was suicide. That was insane. That was against every principle of warfare, but humans didn't care about principles. Any more. Lieutenant Hanna overloaded every orbital cannon simultaneously. The platforms tore themselves apart from the energy surge, but not before firing. 53 Calrathi ships were destroyed in the first salvo. The rest scattered. On the ground, what remained of the human forces launched their final attack. They had no support. No air cover. No artillery. Just soldiers with rifles and rage. Private Jinwoo, now more scar tissue than skin, led a squad of 20 against a Calrathi position held by 300. They knew they couldn't win. They attacked anyway. Sergeant Bao Ra, still strapped into her gun emplacement, fired until her weapon melted. Then she grabbed a rifle. Then a pistol. Then Rox, Corporal Taeyang, the medic who had survived 14 days of hell, stopped treating wounded and started fighting. He had no training for combat. He fought anyway. In orbit, Admiral Subin arrived with the human reinforcement fleet. She had 50 ships against the Calrathi's remaining 400. The smart move would be to negotiate. To try to save what could be saved. Instead, she broadcast a message to the entire fleet. This is Admiral Subin to all human vessels. The colony has fought for 2 weeks against impossible odds. We're not here to save them. We're here to make sure the Calrathi never forget what happens when they fight humans. She turned to her second in command. All ships, attack formation. Show them what Earth sends to finish fights. The Calrathi fleet outnumbered Subin's forces 8-1. The battle should have lasted 20 minutes. It lasted 6 hours. Human ships fought like their colony counterparts. They didn't retreat when damaged. They didn't surrender when surrounded. When they ran out of ammunition, they rammed. When their engines failed, they detonated their reactors in the middle of enemy formations. Major Kyung-ho led a boarding action that became legendary. He took 40 Special Forces soldiers onto a Calrathi flagship. The ship had a crew of 2,000. His team lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of room-to-room fighting against impossible odds. 6 hours of refusing to die even when they should have died. When Kyung-ho was finally cornered, down to just himself and 2 others, all of them bleeding from a dozen wounds, he looked at his companions and smiled. Last one, he said. They had placed charges throughout the ship during their assault. Charges the Calrathi never found because they were too busy trying to stop the humans who wouldn't die. Kyung-ho pressed the detonator. The flagship exploded from within. 3,000 Calrathi died instantly. So did 3 humans who refused to quit. Supreme Nexus Kormouth watched his fleet die and felt fear for the first time in his long life. They had brought overwhelming force. They had brought their most advanced weapons. They had brought enough firepower to destroy a planet, and the humans were beating them, not winning. They were losing by every metric. Human casualties were catastrophic. The colony was burning. The reinforcement fleet was being torn apart, but they were taking the Calrathi with them. For every human ship destroyed, 3 Calrathi ships died. For every human soldier killed, 10 Calrathi fell. They're insane, Kormouth whispered. They're all insane. High Scholar Thelanori stood beside him, watching the slaughter. No, Supreme Nexus, they're human. This is what they are. We have records of their history. They have fought wars for decades, centuries. They have documentation of single battles lasting years. They don't stop fighting because they don't know how to stop. Then how do we beat them? We don't, Thelanori said simply. We survive them. In the command center on New Pyongyang, Captain Daesung collapsed. His body had finally given out after 16 days of continuous command. Medics rushed to him. Status, he gasped. Captain, you need medical care. Status first. Lieutenant Hanna knelt beside him. She looked as bad as he felt. We've lost 89% of our forces. The Calrathi have lost 63%. They're pulling back. Daesung laughed. It hurt. We won? No, sir. We're dying. But they're running. Close enough. He closed his eyes. Not to die? Just to rest? For the first time in 16 days, Captain Daesung allowed himself to rest. Across the colony, the remaining human forces did the same. They didn't surrender. They didn't officially cease fighting. They just ran out of energy to continue. Private Jinwoo collapsed in a crater, his rifle still in his hands. Sergeant Boara slumped over her weapon. Corporal Taeyang lay down on the battlefield and stared at the sky. In orbit, Admiral Subin's flagship was burning. She evacuated to a life pod, still trying to coordinate the battle even as her ship died around her. The Kalrathi fleet jumped away. What remained of it? 213 ships had survived. The rest were debris. In the Kalrathi home system, Supreme Nexus Kermouth called an emergency session of the Elder Voices Collective, the ancient council that truly ruled the empire. The humans must be stopped, he said, the eldest of the voices. A being so old her name was forgotten looked at him with ancient eyes. No, young Nexus, the humans must be understood. We attacked them. We started this war, and we have learned a terrible lesson. What lesson? That there are species in this galaxy that value victory more than survival. Species that will fight past any rational stopping point. Species that make death into a weapon. She gestured at the reports. Look at these humans. Look at what they did. They lost. By every metric, they lost. But they hurt us so badly that we cannot afford another victory like this one. She was right. The Kalrathi Empire had won the battle, but the cost was unthinkable. 300 ships destroyed. Tens of thousands of soldiers dead. And for what? One colony that was now rubble. Recommend we classify humans as apex deathworld species. The battle for New Pingyang officially ended on day 47. Not because anyone surrendered, but because both sides had simply run out of the ability to continue fighting. Captain Dae-seung woke up in a hospital bed. Every part of his body hurt. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Easy, Captain, a nurse said. You've been unconscious for 3 days. Your body shut down from exhaustion. The battle? Over. The Kalrathi have requested peace talks. Dae-seung stared at the ceiling. Peace talks. After 47 days of hell, after watching his colony burn, after losing so many soldiers, did we win? He asked. The nurse was quiet for a moment. I don't know, sir. We're still here. That's something. Colonel Minji arrived at New Pyongyang 5 days later. She was a diplomat, not a soldier, and she represented Earth's government. Her job was to negotiate peace terms with the Kalrathi Empire. She expected to be negotiating from a position of weakness. The colony was destroyed. 89% casualties. The remaining 11% were all in medical care. Instead, the Kalrathi were terrified. Ambassador Velthan, who had started this whole mess with his arrogant speech about civilized warfare, met her in a neutral space station. He looked different now. His 4 eyes kept darting around nervously. His smooth blue skin seemed paler. Colonel Minji, he said through the translator. We wish to discuss terms. Terms? Minji said calmly. You attacked us. You started this war. And now you want terms? Please understand, Velthan said, and there was something like desperation in his voice. We did not know. We did not understand what your species is capable of. We thought the battle would last 6 hours. It lasted 47 days. We thought you would surrender at 30% casualties. You fought at 89% casualties. And we are afraid, Velthan said simply. The Kalrathi Empire is 3,000 years old. We have never encountered a species like yours. Species that do not stop fighting. Species that value victory more than survival. You terrify us. Minji leaned back in her chair. She had read the reports. She knew what the colony had done, what they had sacrificed. And now the enemy that had attacked them was afraid. Good, she said. You should be afraid. Now let's talk about reparations. The negotiations lasted 3 weeks. Minji had expected to beg for peace. Instead, the Kalrathi offered everything. Technology sharing, resource rights, a mutual defense pact, formal recognition of humanity as an equal power. Why are you giving us all this? Minji asked during one session. High Scholar Thelanori, who was leading the Calrathi delegation, pulled up a holographic display. It showed battle statistics, casualty rates, engagement data. Because we ran the numbers, he said quietly. We brought 500 ships to destroy one colony. We lost 287 ships. We had overwhelming numerical and technological superiority. And we barely won. He changed the display. It now showed projections. If we fought Earth itself with its full military, we estimate we could win. But we would lose 90% of our fleet. If we fought all human colonies, we would lose completely. And that is if we fight now, before you acquire our technology? So this is about fear. This is about survival, Thelanori corrected. The Calrathi Empire has survived for 3 millennia by knowing when to fight and when to negotiate. Your species does not follow the same rules. You fight past any rational stopping point. You turn your own deaths into weapons. You do not surrender even when surrender is the logical choice. He looked at Munji with his 4 eyes. We are offering you peace not because we lost, but because we cannot afford to win against you again. Minji accepted the terms. Earth would gain technology, resources, and recognition. The Calrathi would gain something more valuable, the assurance that humans would not come for revenge. Back on New Pyongyang, the survivors were recovering. Private Jinwoo had been promoted to sergeant. He didn't feel like he deserved it. He had just done what everyone else did. He had fought. He visited Sergeant Biora in the hospital. She was learning to use prosthetic legs. The doctors said she would never serve in combat again. She laughed at them and said she would prove them wrong. You're insane, Jinwoo said. Says the man who charged a Calrathi position with 1 arm and a knife, Biora replied. They laughed. It felt good to laugh. Corporal Taeyang had been promoted too. He didn't want the promotion. He just wanted to forget. He had nightmares every night. Dreams of friends dying. Of blood and fire and endless fighting. A therapist told him he had trauma. He told the therapist everyone had trauma. The therapist said that didn't make it better. Taeyang supposed that was true, but he went back to work anyway. Because that's what humans did. They kept going. Lieutenant Hannah had been offered a medal. She refused it. Told them to give it to the soldiers who died. They said those soldiers would get medals too. She said then give her medal to their families. She stayed at New Pyongyang. Someone had to rebuild. Someone had to remember. She would do both. Captain Daesung recovered slowly. The doctor said he would live, but he would never be the same. His body had been pushed past its limits too many times. He had taken years off his life to fight this battle. He didn't regret it. One night he had a visitor. Admiral Subin, who had led the reinforcement fleet. She had survived, barely. Her flagship had been destroyed, but she had evacuated in time. Captain, she said, sitting beside his bed. I wanted to thank you. For what? For holding the line until we got there. For showing the Calrathi what humans are. Daesung shook his head. I didn't do anything special. I just didn't quit. Exactly, Subin said. That's what makes us human. We don't quit. The Calrathi Empire sent a formal message to all species in the galaxy. It was unprecedented. The Empire had never done anything like this before. The message was simple. To all civilizations, we have engaged in combat with the species designated as humans. We believe them to be primitive. We believe their military to be adequate but unremarkable. We believe they followed standard warfare protocols. We were wrong about everything. The humans do not follow standard protocols. They do not surrender at acceptable casualty thresholds. They do not cease combat after regulatory time periods. They do not value their own survival over victory. We attacked a single human colony with overwhelming force. The colony was destroyed, but at catastrophic cost to our military. The humans fought for 47 days without ceasing. They fought at 89% casualty rates. They turned their own deaths into weapons. They rammed our ships with their ships. They overloaded their reactors to destroy our vessels. They continued fighting past any rational stopping point. We have analyzed their biology. They are not significantly stronger or faster than average species. Their technology is adequate but not exceptional. What makes them dangerous is psychological. They do not stop fighting. This is not hyperbole. They literally do not possess the cultural or biological mechanisms that tell them to stop. Formal recommendation. Classify humans as apex deathworld species. Do not engage in combat unless absolutely necessary. If combat is unavoidable, understand that humans do not fight to win. They fight until they cannot physically continue, and they will take you with them when they fall. We have sued for peace. We have offered technology and resources. We have done this not because we lost, but because we cannot survive winning against them. Learn from our mistake. The message spread across the galaxy. Species that had never heard of humans suddenly knew everything they needed to know. Humans were the species that didn't stop fighting. Some species laughed. They thought the Kaurathi were exaggerating. They would learn. Some species took note. They marked human space as no-fly zones. They added humans to the list of species not to antagonize. Some species reached out in friendship. If humans were that dangerous, better to have them as allies than enemies. Private Sohayan had survived the battle. She had been at New Pyongyang from the beginning. She had seen everything. She had fought for 47 days straight. She had watched her friends die. She had thought about giving up 1,000 times, but she never did. Because she was human, and humans didn't quit. After she recovered, they made her an instructor. They wanted her to teach new recruits about combat, about tactics, about warfare. She taught them about something else. On the first day of every class, she told the same story. The story of New Pyongyang. The story of Captain Daesung refusing to surrender. The story of Sergeant Bilra fighting from a gun emplacement after losing her legs. The story of Private Jinwoo charging with one arm and a knife. And at the end of every class, she said the same thing. The enemy will be stronger than you. They will be faster. They will have better weapons and better armor. None of that matters. Because when they reach their limit, they stop. But we don't. We never stop. That's what makes us human. The recruits listened. They took notes. They trained hard. And every single one of them understood. Humans didn't have an off switch. Not in battle. Not in war. Not in anything. It was their greatest weakness and their greatest strength. Back on New Pyongyang, they built a memorial. A wall with the names of every soldier who died in the battle. 8,723 names. Captain Daesung attended the dedication ceremony. So did Lieutenant Hannah, so did Admiral Su-Bin. So did Sergeant Jinwoo, Sergeant Bora, and Corporal Taeyang.